Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Thank you, Mr. Zaidi. Good to be here again. I thought I will do few episodes about the real enemies of India, but then the list keeps growing, and each of them are sounding to be more dangerous than the previous one. So thank you for continuing this series, and I hope my dear friends also are able to comprehend the gravity of each of these enemies as we continue to discuss them. Dear friends, thank you for tuning in and appreciate your feedbacks. There are few more enemies of India suggested by you, and certainly in due course of time, we are going to talk extensively about each one of them, each one of your suggestions. So thank you. Today, we are going to discuss the latest identified real enemy of India. And according to me, it's a silent killer that is going to threaten our future in next 10 to 20 years. To understand this threat, let's look at examples from around the world where countries are already grappling with this issue. India is no stranger to this problem, but then recent events have made it more imminent. So this month, a significant development happened, and this means that this real enemy will soon infiltrate our streets and markets and will walk around freely. So we begin with our journey to Kenya, and Kenya being the third world country in East Africa, it is striving to escape poverty, and like India had been under colonial rule. So traditionally, it's a farming nation, not much in terms of farming success. But then Kenya had relied on indigenous crops and seeds. However, in 2012, under the influence of large corporations, the Kenyan parliament enacted the Seed and Plant Varieties Act. So this law actually prohibits farmers from sharing and exchanging these indigenous seeds. And if they want to do so, they have to have it registered. Also, the farmers are forced to buy seeds from the corporations. So the law also aims to protect the individual property rights of these corporations with severe penalties in case there is violation, and it also includes imprisonment and hefty fines. So that's to protect the corporations. But then if you argue, the law serves corporate interest at the expense of small farmers. On the other side, the Kenyan government has failed to protect the indigenous seed ownership and the traditional farming knowledge, and that has further marginalized the local farmers. As a result, a significant reduction in traditional agricultural activities is seen, and an increase in the cost of farming, which is further leading to higher food price inflation, and it is already an impoverished country. The other side is that the government of Kenya has taken no step to protect the intellectual property rights, if that's the concept, to protect the copyright or the intellectual property rights of those indigenous seeds. So it has to be two-way, and there is an imbalance. A similar story about Senegal, where the farmers have historically cultivated wide variety of groundnut seeds, which is well suited to the local soil and the climate conditions. So despite their resilience, these crops are disappearing due to government and international policies. And those policies are actually favoring an exotic and high-yielding crop promoted by these corporations, the agrotech corporations. So these new crops, instead of growing in a dry, of less water environment, so these new crops require more water, and therefore it is altering the country's social and the dietary legacies, and of course would be threatening the biodiversity. The economic stress on the farmers is mounting because these large corporations are pushing for these specialized production methods and the seeds and the expensive pesticides, and they are doing so because the high yield due to these seeds will help them dominate the global market. So in return, Senegal's traditional crops are being systematically sacrificed. We are seeing reflection of something like this in India too. But then one more example. Mexico, we see another battleground between the farmers and the government and the large corporations. Of lately, Mexico is phasing out glyphosate herbicides, which is basically used in genetically modified corn cultivation. And that's because the Mexicans have recognized the health risk and the environmental damage the genetically modified crops have caused to the country. So the government of Mexico aims to protect Mexico's indigenous corn varieties and also to promote safe and healthy food. However, according to the news report, corporations which are responsible for these GMO, genetically modified organisms, these corporations like Bayer, Monsanto, and Dow have launched numerous lawsuits against the Mexican government to overturn this law. Now we know that this GM crop and the attached pesticide, this forms a powerful cartel and it is aiming to control the global agriculture production. We also have numerous scientific studies that show that the GM crops and the associated pesticides that has caused significant health problems for people, for animals, and for the biodiversity and environment in general. So for instance, there's a study from National Institute of Health, and that indicates that the GM food causes, or rather may cause, toxic effects such as liver, pancreas, kidneys, and reproductive issues, and may alter hematological, biochemical, and immunological parameters. So in simple language, it will affect our blood composition, hormonal composition, imbalances, and our human body's strength to fight viruses and bacteria. So that's the danger the GM crops have on the wider population of a country. One more case back home in India. And here I'm trying to draw a parallel by recalling a case of PepsiCo India versus farmers in Gujarat. So when farmers grew and sold a potato aloo variety provided by PepsiCo India, the company claimed exclusive rights to the seeds, and they then sued the farmers for intellectual property violations. How weird is that? So the massive protest happened across the state, and then PepsiCo India was forced to withdraw the lawsuit. But the incident highlights the vulnerability of the Indian farmers to corporate exploitation and the facilitating role of the government in bringing those corporates into the agriculture business of India. So the question then, I would say, is that why is the Indian government allowing foreign corporations to impose the restrictive intellectual property laws on our Indian farmers? How can the Indian government let these rights dictate what food India grows and consumes? And with the current situation, it indicates that India is losing the battle of agriculture, agro-industrial battle. So India is already trying to develop GM for 13 crops like rice, wheat, and sugarcane. And already BT cotton, which is a genetically modified crop, is being commercially cultivated, and mustard is being added very recently to the approved list. But then the activists have said that GM mustard would require widespread use of pesticides, herbicides, and they possess a threat to the honeybees. So while the mustard fields, the yellow fields, will have a bumper crop, it is going to destroy the biodiversity and would harm the honeybees in India. While our country continues to be divided and engaged in Hindu-Muslim superiority battles, this Modi government has slipped a potentially dangerous proposal. Here it is. In the 2024 budget, the current government has approved 109 varieties of so-called climate-resistant crops, which is a rebranding or marketing ploy of genetically modified crops. And this is according to the Brunel University research paper. This policy was quietly slipped into the budget and there was little public awareness. Till today, I'm yet to see a national debate about this genetically modified crops being approved. And these crops actually are going to threaten the soil health of the country, the food security. These crops also require specific pesticides and herbicides, and this is going to increase the farming cost and the food inflation. Moreover, these crops pose serious health risk, as I just suggested, and it had been demonstrated by multiple scientific studies. We do have a referential experience from countries like Mexico, Senegal, and Kenya. Now, here comes the surprise. According to Reuters, the current government has warned administrative procedures against any former or current officials speaking against genetically modified mustard. So now this is a authoritarian behavior by the government, a dictatorial behavior by the government, where people are the employees, the government officials are not allowed to express their opinion about the development of genetically modified mustard. European Union is still not allowed the genetically modified crops in any country, in any member country of the European Union. On the other hand, we see that despite resistance from the European Union and other nations, India has allowed these crops to enter the market. Now in India, the implications are going to be dire with rising cancer rates, and though the booming economy would then be centered on cancer treatment. The number of cancer patients in India is rising. It's rising exponentially. And therefore, it's a grim indicator of misplaced priorities, even though may contribute to the GDP growth of the country, but then the business of treating cancer will contribute to that GDP. And that is going to be a very, very sad thing. So dear friends, I would like to say that the recent budget decision imposes a great threat to India by approving 109 varieties of climate-resistant genetically modified crops and plants. The corporate interests are driving the Indian agricultural policy, and this is going to have consequential effects on the population, 1.4 billion health of the Indians. So the gravity of this situation needs to be recognized, and therefore important steps needs to be taken. The gravity of the situation needs to be understood, and at least we should start talking about defending our Annapurna and the future health of the country. Thank you for your kind attention. Dear friends, stay tuned with our next discussion on another pressing issue facing India, another real enemy of India. Bye for now.
Dublin South FM.